The man walked in like he didn't belong there. It was June 20th, 2004. Busy evening at a seafood restaurant in Orange County, California. The manager on duty was working the takeout counter when the door suddenly opened, a little too fast. A teenage boy stepped inside. He looked around quickly, not like someone checking the menu, but like someone making sure no one was watching. Then he approached the counter. He spoke fast. Too fast, asking about a to-go order that wasn't ready yet. But instead of waiting calmly like everyone else, he kept shifting his weight, glancing over his shoulder, tapping his fingers against the counter. The manager tried to reassure him. It'll just be a minute. But the boy didn't relax. If anything, he looked worse. His breathing felt shallow. His eyes never stayed in one place. It was the kind of behavior you notice, but don't question at the time, because nothing had happened yet. When the order was finally ready, the boy grabbed the bag almost instantly. No small talk, no eye contact. He paid, turned around, and left as quickly as he came in. The whole interaction lasted less than 2 minutes, but something about it stayed with the manager. Not enough to call the police. Not enough to report anything. Just enough to remember. A few days later, that memory would come back, not as a strange encounter, but as something far worse, because the police would walk into that same restaurant, holding a photo, and ask a simple question. Have you seen this person? And the manager would recognize him immediately, not as a suspect, but as the nervous kid who couldn't wait to leave. Jane Thompson lived alone. Her house sat in a quiet neighborhood in Laguna Niguel, California, the kind of place where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, neighbors who knew each other by name. And Jane was exactly the kind of person you'd expect to find there. She was 72 years old, a retired film industry worker who had spent years in Los Angeles before eventually settling down somewhere quieter, somewhere safer. People described her as kind, soft-spoken, the kind of neighbor who remembered birthdays and always made time to talk. She wasn't isolated, either. She had friends who checked in on her, neighbors who looked out for her, and someone special in her life, a man she was supposed to meet just a few days later. Which is why, when she didn't show up, it didn't feel right. At first, it was just a missed call. Then another. Then silence. Her friend Mary Larkin noticed it first. Jane wasn't the type to disappear. Not without saying something. Concern quickly turned into worry, and worry turned into action. Mary reached out to a neighbor Karen Hamara. Together, they decided to go to Jane's house. Just to check, just to make sure everything was okay. When they arrived, nothing seemed wrong at first. The house was quiet. Too quiet. They walked up to the door. Knocked. No answer. They called out her name. Still nothing. Then, one small detail changed everything. The back door was open. Not wide open. Just enough to notice. Just enough to feel wrong. Mary and Karen didn't go inside. Instead, they stepped back and called the police. Because in a place like that, on a street that quiet, an open door wasn't just unusual. It was a warning. And whatever was inside that house was no longer the life Jane had been living. It was something else entirely. The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers approached the house carefully, calling out as they stepped inside, "Hello, police department." No response. The air inside felt still, heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. Nothing looked obviously disturbed at first glance. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. But as they moved deeper into the house, that feeling started to change. Something wasn't right. Then they reached the living room, and everything stopped. Jane Thompson was there. On the floor, near the sofa where she had likely been resting. She wasn't moving, and it was immediately clear this wasn't natural. The scene was violent, brutal in a way that didn't match the quiet neighborhood outside. There were no signs of a struggle spreading through the house. No overturned furniture. No chaos. Just one sudden, concentrated act, as if it had happened quickly, unexpectedly. The kind of violence that comes from panic, not planning. Detectives were called in shortly after. Daniel Salado, Brian Sutton. They had seen cases like this before, but something about this one stood out. An elderly woman. Well-liked. No known enemies. And no clear reason why anyone would want to hurt her. They began with the obvious. Friends. Family. Anyone close to her. They looked into her relationship, the man she was supposed to meet. They checked timelines. Alibis. Everything came back clean. No motive. No direct connection. Which made the case more difficult. Because when there's no clear reason, there's usually something missing. Something small. Something easy to overlook. So the detectives shifted their focus. Not to who might have wanted to hurt Jane, but to what had changed in the days leading up to her death. Because somewhere in that timeline was the moment everything went wrong, and they just hadn't seen it yet. For days, the case didn't move. No witnesses. No forced entry. No clear suspect. It was as if whoever did this had simply walked in and walked out without leaving anything behind. But cases like this don't stay silent forever. Eventually, something small surfaced. Not from the crime scene, but from Jane's own records. One of the detectives was going through her recent activity. Calls, notes, anything that might seem out of place. That's when they found it. A message. Saved on her answering machine. It wasn't long. And it didn't sound urgent. Just a routine notification about a credit card transaction. At first, it didn't seem important. But then they checked the date. It was recent. Too recent. And there was no reason Jane should have been using her card like that. Especially not at that location. So they followed it. The transaction led them to a restaurant in Orange County. A normal place. Busy. Nothing unusual. Until they walked inside and asked the staff a simple question. Do you remember this card being used? The manager hesitated. Not because he didn't know, but because something about that day had already stayed with him. Then the detectives showed him a photo, and everything clicked. It was him, the same nervous teenager, the one who came in, barely able to stand still, in a hurry to leave. The manager didn't know his name, but he remembered the behavior, the way he looked over his shoulder, the way he rushed everything, like he didn't want to be there any longer than necessary. And suddenly, what once felt like a strange interaction became something else entirely. Because now, it wasn't just a memory. It was a lead, and for the first time since the case began, the detectives weren't looking at a mystery anymore. They were looking at a direction, one that led much closer to home than anyone expected. The lead didn't take long to follow. Once the detectives had the face, it was only a matter of time before they had the name. Sam Nelson, 15 years old, and living just a few houses away from Jane Thompson. At first, it didn't make sense. A teenager, from the same quiet neighborhood, so close that he could walk to her house in minutes. But as they looked deeper, patterns started to form. This wasn't the first time. Sam had been inside Jane's house before, not as a guest, but as someone who didn't belong there. He had broken in more than once, quietly. carefully, taking small things at first, until one day, he took something bigger, her credit card. He used it to buy things he couldn't afford. Food, items to impress his friends, trying to build a version of himself that didn't exist. And somehow, Jane found out, but she didn't call the police. She gave him another chance. A decision that, at the time, felt like kindness. But on the night of June 24th, 2004, that decision came back. Sam entered the house again, same way as before, quiet, unnoticed. He thought it would be easy, in and out, just like the other times. But this time, Jane was there, awake. She saw him, and in that moment, everything changed. There was no plan, no escape, just panic, and something in him snapped. What happened next was fast, violent, irreversible. By the time it was over, the quiet house on that street was no longer safe. When the detectives confronted him, it didn't take long. The story came out, piece by piece, not from a criminal mastermind, but from a teenager who made one decision, and then another, and then one he could never take back. Sam Nelson was arrested and later sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole years into the future. But none of that changes what happened, because in the end, this wasn't just a story about a crime. It was a story about trust, about a second chance given to the wrong person, and a quiet neighborhood that never felt the same again.